You believe your choices are your own. Your opinions, your decisions, your preferences. You believe these emerge from your own independent thinking, your own values, your own rational assessment of the world around you. What if they don't? What if a significant portion of what you think, feel, want, and decide is the result of psychological forces operating on you deliberately, skillfully, and entirely without your awareness or consent? This is not conspiracy theory. This is not paranoia. This is documented, peer-reviewed, extensively studied psychology, the science of influence, persuasion, and manipulation. How it works, who uses it, and how it is being used on you right now is one of the most important bodies of knowledge a human being can possess. Because the alternative, remaining unaware, does not protect you from being influenced. It simply means you are influenced without knowing it. And that is the most dangerous position of all. What follows is not comfortable, but it is true. And the truth, however, unsettling, is always preferable to a comfortable illusion someone else constructed for you. The scientific study of influence and persuasion began in earnest in the mid-20th century, driven partly by the horrifying question that World War II left in its wake. How did it happen? How did ordinary people in an educated modern society come to participate in atrocities of that scale? The answer that psychology gradually assembled was deeply uncomfortable. It was not that those people were uniquely evil or uniquely different from us. It was that they were human, and humans are extraordinarily susceptible to specific identifiable psychological forces that operate largely below conscious awareness. Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments demonstrated that ordinary people would administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to strangers, simply because an authority figure told them to, not monsters, ordinary people. Up to 65% of them in study after study. Solomon Asch showed that people would deny the evidence of their own eyes, would claim a clearly shorter line was longer simply because everyone else in the room said so. The pressure to conform overrode direct sensory experience. These are not edge cases, these are features of human psychology that anyone who understands them can exploit. In 1984, psychologist Robert Cialdini published Influence, the result of years spent studying techniques used by salespeople, advertisers, cult leaders, and con artists whose livelihood depended on getting people to say yes. What he found were 6 principles: weapons of influence, position. We feel pressure to remain consistent. Getting a small yes today makes a larger yes tomorrow far more likely. Social proof. We look to others to determine correct behavior. When everyone seems to be doing something, we assume they must know something. We don't. Manipulators manufacture this appearance of consensus deliberately. Scarcity. We want what is rare. Limited time, limited availability, exclusive access. These are not just marketing tactics. They are direct exploitations of a deep evolutionary bias toward acquiring resources before they disappear. Of all the manipulative personality types that psychology has documented, the narcissist is perhaps the most important to understand, because narcissistic manipulation is so specifically designed to be invisible to its target and so reliably devastating in its long-term effects. Narcissistic manipulation typically follows a recognizable pattern that begins with something that feels extraordinary. Love bombing, an overwhelming flood of attention, affection, admiration, and apparent understanding that makes the target feel seen and valued in a way they may never have experienced before. This is not accidental. The narcissist is at this stage studying you, learning your insecurities, your needs, your values, your wounds, and reflecting them back to you in a form designed to make you feel that this person understands you completely. Once the attachment is formed, once you have invested emotionally, restructured your life, perhaps made yourself vulnerable in ways you rarely do, the dynamic shifts. The idealization gives way to devaluation. Criticism replaces praise. Withdrawal replaces warmth. And you find yourself working desperately to get back to the beginning, to the person who made you feel so extraordinary, but without realizing that person was never quite real. Gaslighting is a term that has entered popular culture, but whose clinical reality is frequently more severe and more systematically destructive than casual usage suggests. The term comes from a 1944 film in which a husband systematically manipulates his wife into believing she is losing her mind, dimming the gaslights and then denying they have changed, hiding objects and insisting she misplaced them, undermining her perception of reality so thoroughly that she comes to depend entirely on his version of events. As a psychological manipulation technique, gaslighting works by attacking the target's relationship with their own perception, memory, and judgment. That didn't happen. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong. I never said that. What makes gaslighting so effective and so damaging is that it exploits a genuine feature of human memory and perception. Our memories are reconstructive, not photographic. Our perceptions are influenced by context and expectation. We know this about ourselves, and a skilled gaslighter uses that self-knowledge against us, making us doubt our own experience by pointing to the genuine imperfections of human cognition. Over time, the target of sustained gaslighting may lose confidence in their own perceptions entirely, becoming dependent on the manipulator to define reality for them. The word cult triggers images of extreme, obviously aberrant groups, robes, compounds, charismatic leaders making apocalyptic claims. What the psychology of cult influence actually reveals is far more unsettling. The techniques used to recruit and retain cult members are not exotic or unique. They are the same principles of influence and manipulation that operate in many ordinary relationships, organizations, and social structures, simply applied more systematically and more completely. Recruitment rarely begins with extreme demands. It begins with community, with the genuine human need for belonging, purpose, and understanding being met in a context that feels warm, accepting, and meaningful. The extreme elements are introduced gradually, incrementally, as commitment deepens and the social cost of leaving rises. Isolation from family, friends, and outside perspectives is a central feature of cult control. Not because isolation is inherently demanded, but because outside relationships provide reality checks. They provide alternative perspectives that might challenge the group's worldview. Eliminating them eliminates the corrective. The most important insight from cult psychology is this: it is not weak or stupid people who get drawn in. Research consistently shows that cult members are often highly intelligent, educated, and idealistic people whose genuine desire for meaning and community was exploited by those who understood how to do so. Psychology has identified a cluster of personality traits that, when present together, create what researchers call the dark triad, a combination that produces individuals who are both highly skilled at manipulation and largely unbothered by its consequences. The three components are narcissism, an inflated sense of self-importance, entitlement, and need for admiration; Machiavellianism, a calculating, strategic approach to other people as means to ends, combined with a willingness to deceive and manipulate to achieve goals; and psychopathy, reduced empathy, reduced anxiety, and a shallow emotional life that makes the psychological cost of harming others minimal. Individually, each trait exists on a spectrum across the general population. In combination and at high levels, They produce individuals who are often extraordinarily effective, achieving their goals in social and professional environments precisely because they operate without the constraints that govern most people's behavior. What makes dark triad individuals particularly dangerous in interpersonal contexts is that they are frequently charming, socially skilled, and initially impressive. The lack of anxiety that characterizes psychopathy produces a confidence and smoothness that others find attractive. The narcissistic need for admiration produces behaviors that in the early stages of a relationship feel like intense interest and appreciation. The most sophisticated application of dark psychology in the modern world does not happen in individual relationships. It happens at scale through media, advertising, and digital platforms that have industrialized the science of influence and applied it to billions of people simultaneously. Advertising has always been applied. Psychology, the deliberate use of psychological principles to create desire, manufacture insecurity, and drive behavior. What has changed in the digital age is the precision, the personalization, and the relentlessness of its application. Modern digital advertising knows more about your psychological profile, your fears, your insecurities, your desires, your vulnerabilities than most of the people in your life do. And it uses that knowledge to present you with messages specifically calibrated to your particular psychology at the moment you are most susceptible to them. Social media platforms are, at their core, attention capture machines designed by behavioral psychologists and engineers to maximize the time you spend on them by exploiting the same psychological mechanisms that make slot machines addictive. Variable reward schedules, social validation, fear of missing out, outrage, which is one of the most effective engagement drivers known, and which is therefore algorithmically promoted regardless of its effect on the mental health of the people consuming it. At the largest scale of all, dark psychology operates through propaganda, the deliberate use of psychological influence techniques by governments, political movements, and institutions to shape the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of entire populations. Propaganda is as old as organized human society, but the 20th century transformed it into a science, and the 21st century has given it tools of unprecedented reach and precision. The core techniques of propaganda map directly onto the psychological principles we have already discussed. Repetition, because beliefs that are repeated frequently enough come to feel true regardless of their actual validity. This is called the illusory truth effect, and it has been demonstrated repeatedly in controlled studies, in-group and out-group dynamics, because humans are tribal, and defining a clear enemy whose threat justifies extraordinary measures is one of the most reliable ways to consolidate loyalty and suppress critical thinking. Emotional activations are because when fear, anger, or outrage are high, the capacity for rational evaluation is low. Propaganda that generates strong emotions is more persuasive and less likely to be critically examined than propaganda that appeals to reason. Of all the tools in the manipulator's arsenal, emotional manipulation is perhaps the most intimate and the most commonly experienced, because it operates not through grand psychological experiments or institutional power, but through the ordinary texture of everyday relationships. Emotional manipulation exploits the genuine human capacity for empathy, the ability to feel what others feel, to respond to their distress, to be moved by their experience. In healthy relationships, this capacity creates genuine connection and mutual care. In manipulative relationships, it becomes the mechanism of control. Guilt is one of the primary tools. The manipulator generates guilt through statements that imply the target is responsible for their distress, through reminders of past favors, through comparisons designed to make the target feel inadequate, and then offers relief from that, guilt through compliance. Shame is another, where guilt says, "You did something wrong." Shame says, "You are something wrong." And the manipulator who can reliably activate shame has found the deepest lever available, because shame is the emotion most likely to produce compliance at any cost, because the target will do almost anything to make the feeling stop. DAVO is an acronym that describes one of the most disorienting manipulation techniques used by abusers and manipulators. When confronted with their behavior, it stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender. When confronted, when someone gathers the courage to name what is happening, to express how they have been hurt, to hold the manipulator accountable, the DAVO response follows a predictable pattern. Deny it didn't happen. You're misremembering. That's not what I said. You're twisting things. A flat, confident denial designed to immediately destabilize the confronter's confidence in their own perception. Attack, you're too sensitive. You're always making me the villain. You do things just as bad. Why are you bringing this up now? The attack shifts the emotional charge of the conversation. Suddenly the person who raised a concern is on the defensive. Reverse, victim and offender. The manipulator presents themselves as the true victim, hurt by the accusation, damaged by the confrontation, suffering from the unfairness of being misunderstood. And the person who was genuinely hurt finds themselves somehow apologizing for raising the issue. DAVO is effective because it exploits empathy, the confronter's genuine capacity to feel concerned about the manipulator's distress, and turns it into a mechanism of silencing. Love bombing deserves its own examination, because it is one of the most effective and least recognized manipulation techniques in interpersonal relationships, and because its effects can last for years after the relationship that employed it has ended. Love bombing is the deliberate, strategic flooding of a target with positive attention, affection, admiration, gifts, and apparent understanding at an intensity and pace that feels overwhelming in the most positive sense. You have never felt so seen, so valued, so chosen. This intensity is the point. It is designed to bypass the normal, gradual process of trust building to create a powerful emotional bond before you have had time to observe, evaluate, or understand who the person actually is. What makes love bombing particularly effective is that it exploits something genuine, the human need for connection, for being truly seen, for being chosen by someone who seems extraordinary. The longing that love bombing targets is not weakness, it is humanity, and that is precisely why it works. The attachment formed during love bombing is real, even though the persona that created it was not. And when the dynamic shifts, when the warmth withdraws and the control begins. Understanding dark psychology is not about becoming paranoid. It is not about treating every act of generosity as a manipulation, every charming person as a threat, or every persuasive argument as an attempt at control. Most people, most of the time, are not engaged in deliberate psychological manipulation. But some are, and the cost of being unable to recognize it when it is happening can be enormous in relationships, in professional contexts, and in the broader cultural environment we all navigate daily. The first and most important protection is awareness itself. Manipulation operates most effectively in the dark, on targets who have no framework for recognizing what is being done to them. The moment you understand the techniques, they lose much of their power. The second protection is time. Most manipulation techniques work by creating urgency, pressure to decide, to commit, to act before you have had time to think clearly, practice of slowing down, of refusing to make significant decisions under pressure, of insisting on time to think, disrupts many of these techniques before they can fully take hold. The third protection is your own discomfort. When something feels wrong, when a situation, a relationship, or an argument produces a persistent sense of unease that you cannot quite articulate, that feeling is information. It is worth taking seriously, always. The deliberate. For those who have been subjected to sustained psychological manipulation in intimate relationships, in family systems, in professional contexts, or in high control groups, recovery is not simply a matter of leaving the situation and returning to normal, because sustained manipulation changes things. It changes your relationship with your own perception. You may find yourself doubting your memories, your judgments, your instincts long after the manipulator is no longer present. It changes your relationship with trust, both trust in others and trust in yourself. It may have changed your beliefs, your identity, your understanding of your own history. Recovery from psychological manipulation is in many ways the work of reclaiming your own mind, of learning, again, to trust your perceptions, of distinguishing between the beliefs and self-assessments that are genuinely yours and those that were installed by someone else for their own purposes. This work takes time. It is non-linear. There will be days of clarity and days of confusion. But there will also be days when something shifts, when you catch yourself trusting your own judgment, honoring your own perception, acting from your own values, and recognize that as the return of something that was always yours. The most important thing to understand about dark psychology, about manipulation, influence, and the ways human beings exploit each other's psychology is not how to use it. It is how to see it, because you cannot defend against what you cannot recognize, and you cannot recognize what you have never been taught to see. The fact that these techniques exist, that they are systematic, that they are effective, that they are being used on you in ways large and small every single day is not a reason for paranoia. It is a reason for education, for awareness, for the development of psychological literacy, the ability to understand the forces acting on your mind and to make genuinely informed choices about how you respond. You are not powerless. The manipulator's greatest advantage is your ignorance of what they are doing. Remove that advantage, understand the techniques, recognize the patterns, trust your discomfort, slow down in the face of pressure and the dynamic changes. Fundamentally, your mind is yours. Your perceptions are yours. Your choices at their best and most genuine are yours. Protecting them is not selfishness or paranoia. It is one of the most important things you will ever do. Subscribe. Every week a new video drops. Mind Decoded. See you next video.